Tomorrow all the things were gone I'd hoped for all my life, and I had to start again with just my boyfriend by my side. I thank my God above to be living here today, because this flag still stands for freedom and they can't take that away. I'm proud to be an American, where at least I know I'm free, and I won't forget the men who died and gave that right to me, and I gladly stand up next to you and defend her still today. There ain't no doubt I love this land. God bless the USA. From the lakes of Minnesota to the hills of Tennessee, across the plains of Texas, from sea to shining sea, from Detroit down to Houston and New York to LA. There's pride in every American heart, and it's time we stand and say, proud to be an American, where at least I know I'm free, and I won't forget the men who died and gave that right to me, and I gladly stand up next to you and defend her still today, because there ain't no doubt I love this land. God bless the USA. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm proud to be an American, where at least I know I'm free. I won't forget the men who died and gave that right to me, and I gladly stand up next to you and defend her still today, because there ain't no doubt I love this land. God bless the USA. I'm so proud to be an American. God bless America. God bless America. God bless the USA. Welcome. This is James, and welcome to our first installment of Life According to a Gay Pentecostal Republican. That's me. Now, before we get started, just to explain a little bit, the first thing that people ask whenever I mention that I'm a gay Pentecostal Republican never fails: how in the world are you not having inner conflict 24/7? And, which I don't. I do not have inner conflict, okay? I do not have self-hate issues or anything like that. And I can explain the reason why. I'm gay, I'm Pentecostal, and I'm Republican. None of the three have anything to do with each other. You can be a Pentecostal and be a Republican, independent, Democrat, whatever. Communist, who cares? Okay? You can be a Pentecostal, or you can be a Democrat and be Pentecostal, Buddhist, Hindu, whatever. Neither one of them have anything to do with the other. The one that throws people off, kind of, is the gay part. Because as a Republican, most Republicans have an issue with gay. Also, in the Pentecostal realm, most Pentecostals, Christians in general, have an issue with the gay part. Now, I believe that my sexual orientation is part of my nature. Okay? I can't change that. I didn't choose it. In fact, if I'd have chose it, if I would have gotten what I would have chosen, I would be married with a wife and 2 kids now, have a job that I make plenty of money at, and be able to go on vacations every now and then to foreign countries. Okay? If I had my choice, that's what I would have. Nature don't work like that. I don't believe that it's any more, and I'll discuss that the next time. But just safe to say, my belief is that I have a characteristic that is gay. Being Pentecostal is another one of my characteristics, and being Republican is another one. And none of the 3 have anything to do with each other. Okay? Now, be that as it may, which is going to lead us into our first topic for our discussions, and that is separation of church and state. Okay? Separation of church and state, I believe, or actually the lack of separation of church and state, is the possible root cause of several moral issues that we have in our country today, ranging from the issues that priests seem to have in keeping their hands off of kids, of there seem to be more hate in the church than love, and so on and so forth. So we're going to tackle this from a little bit different of an approach. We're actually going to be all over the timeline today. We're going to start out with the Founding Fathers. How do they view this separation of church and state? Then we're going to go to the Bible, and we're going to find out if the Bible says, and the Bible does say some about it, about this separation of church and state. We're also going to find out how it applies to our modern world. Okay? So first off, Founding Fathers. There's 2 camps of the founding, or 2 camps that of the reason why our Founding Fathers came to America. 2 camps. One believes that it was for religious freedom. They didn't want to be under the religious oppression of the Roman Catholic Church anymore. So they wanted freedom to be able to worship however they wanted to. The other camp believes, it has nothing to do with freedom of religion. It has to do with freedom from tyranny, political tyranny. It had nothing to do with religion. It was all about taxes, all about the severe oppression that was going on at the time, and so on and so forth and so on. So, my personal belief is that it was both. And the root cause is what I feel a lack of separation of church and state. That's how it can be both. It's when you don't have separation of church and state, religious tyranny then becomes political tyranny. And political tyranny becomes religious tyranny. Okay? So, we got separation of church and state. Now, I'm going to prove that. First off, in today's world, not just in today's world, but in the time of our founding fathers, who would you say would be the most powerful political power in Europe? It's not a trick question. The Vatican. The Vatican, I believe, and I believe a lot of you will agree, that the Vatican is and has maintained to be the most powerful political power in Europe. Now, the Vatican being the most powerful political power, that doesn't sound like such a bad thing, until you realize what that resulted in. when you have a religious institution also be the most powerful political power, you have things happen like the Crusades. You have things happen like the Holocaust. You have things happen like the Salem witch trials. All three of these things happen because of a lack of separation of church and state. And if you could picture it, if you can even picture it, a Europe whose church kept its hands and its nose out of politics, I think you would agree the Crusades would never have happened. Because the Crusades were killing the infidels. Basically what happened is there was too much politics in its pulpits and too much preaching in its politics. And that is the reason why our founding fathers wanted to get the hell out. The next point I want to make about our founding fathers is the church will emphasize on the fact that of the 55 men who formed the Constitution, 52 of them were active in church. And they tried to use that as a support for us being built as a Christian country, as a Christian nation. Here's the problem with that. Of the 55 men who formed the Constitution, 3 of them were not active in church. A Christian nation cannot be made up of non-Christian members. In short, a nation is no more Christian than its least faithful member. And you can apply that to other countries and other religions as well. If Iraq, the very first second that Iraq elects a non-Muslim official, don't you think that the country is going to start questioning its religion? It can no longer announce Islam as its national religion. Next point. Basically and so all of this came to the point of, and this is the whole reason why there is so little, there's vague references in the Constitution, but there's nothing overtly Christian about it. Okay? And they knew the reason why. There's a reason why they didn't include a lot of that in the Constitution. The reason is because they knew from past experience in Europe that if you add the church plus state, you get war blood on your priest's hands. And I think that's the reason why the Roman Catholic Church has still to this day, or has just to this day, started quelching its corruption. The last point I want to make is the Constitution, while having vague references, and I've kind of touched on this, while having vague references to God and the church, does not attest Christianity as the sum of its parts. Other countries do have that. Countries that have a national religion, they have a statement in their constitution or what have you, the legal documents, stating that their religion is Christian, or is whatever religion it is, Muslim, Buddhism, whatever. While many of our laws are patterned after the Ten Commandments, I do not believe this is a link to religion at all, but rather a link to one of the clearest, oldest, and most basic legal codes. See, Christians keep looking at the Ten Commandments from a spiritual standpoint. That's the problem. When the Ten Commandments were written, there was nothing spiritual about it. The Ten Commandments and the Law of Moses were not just a list of moral principles. They were real laws, much like our laws against underage drinking, speeding, or drug possession. They carried very, very real penalties here on this earth. They weren't just principles to live by to get a better afterlife. They were legal, and you had legal penalties if you didn't follow them. God was their government, and Moses was one of their founding fathers. This is leading us into our section on the Bible. Even in the Old Testament, before God gave Israel a king, the tribe of priests was not the tribe of warriors. In fact, the priests were to keep their hands clean. They could not enter the Holy of Holies without being clean. Again, and I will repeat this later, they could not enter the Holy of Holies without being clean. Even though God anointed David to be king after he had anointed King Saul, and King Saul had messed up, he did not urge David to overthrow King Saul. In fact, he allowed that to happen on its own. He allowed regular politics to take its course. Even when Israel was under a foreign rule, they followed the laws of the land as long as they did not conflict and interfere with the laws of God. Now but our best option, or our best example of what the Bible says about this separation of church and state actually happens in the New Testament. The first one being Jesus himself. During Jesus' last visit to Jerusalem before he was betrayed by Judas, the Pharisees thought they would try to catch him up. They thought they would try to trip him up on something. So it was tax time, and the Pharisees came to Jesus asking this question: who should we pay our taxes to? Because we are Jews in a Roman-controlled area. Who should we pay our taxes to? God or Caesar? Jesus asked them, whose inscription's on that coin? I apologize for that. I had a text come through. So, Jesus asked, whose inscription's on that coin? They said, Caesar's. Jesus then said, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. Give God what is God's. In other words, now, God gave us a brain to think with. God gave us a common sense. And the Bible says to read and understand the word with wisdom. Okay, that doesn't mean that we just look at what it says for face value. Okay, we have to use common sense. We have to use wisdom. Wisdom says that, well, there was a reason for him saying this. And he was saying God's jurisdiction doesn't overlap Caesar's jurisdiction. That's what he was saying. In fact, he was saying, because that inscription is on there, you're to give that to Caesar. God doesn't want your money. In fact, the tithe and what was always brought as sacrifice had never anything to do with currency. Currency, keep in mind, currency is a man-made system. Not God. God didn't make currency. God made the materials that we make currency out of, but God did not make currency or make the system of currency. That was a man-made system. God's system has been and always will be bartering. They would bring livestock as sacrifice. You would bring a tenth of your fruits, of your first fruits, to God. You didn't bring your money because the church doesn't have it. Well, I'll put it this way. In the old days, the church didn't have anything they needed money for. Okay? The church wasn't supposed to have all these expensive cars and all these big, majestic cathedrals. They weren't supposed to have that when it was first started. When it was first started, they were actually, the people were supposed to sell their possessions, give the money to the poor, and then they would come together, worship God, do all of those things. Had nothing to do with currency. So when Jesus says, whose inscription's on that? He was saying, yeah, Caesar made that. That coin belongs to Caesar. You give the taxes to Caesar. But he was also saying, you also need to give God what is God's. What is God's? Several different things. That's neither here nor there about that. That's a very, very big other discussion. So, we have Jesus promoting the separation of church and state. Now we go forward to Paul. One of Paul's letters, and I think Jesus had even said this himself as well. You are to follow the laws of the land until they interfere with the laws of God. Paul also said that all things are lawful, but not all things are beneficial. In other words, there are things that are lawful, that are okay to do according to the law, according to the governing law, but they're not beneficial for your spiritual life. In our day, that would be very similar to drinking. That would be very similar to drugs, to, theme parks. All of these things are very lawful to do, well, at least on the legal substances, or legal drugs. They're very legal, but they're not beneficial for your spiritual life. So what he was saying was that God is not going to dictate the things that don't benefit or hurt your spiritual life. God's not going to dictate, again I'm going to say it, God is not going to dictate things, what you do and don't do, if they don't affect your spiritual life. If they don't affect your spiritual life one way or the other, then, as long as it's lawful, there's nothing against it. Paul also says that we are to pray for our leaders. Now, I mentioned this earlier, but if the church would spend even a half as much time in the prayer closet, if they would do it the way that it was supposed to be designed, which is you're supposed to pray for your leadership instead of protesting it, their hands wouldn't be as dirty, and they would have more time for the work of God. All this now brings us to modern application. How does all of this incorporate into our modern day today? Well, first off, the government has agreed that because of this separation of church and state, that the church should be exempt from paying taxes. Now, you know who else is exempt from paying taxes? Prisoners. They also don't have a right to vote either, which tells me that our government has agreed that the church should not have a say-so in what goes on legally. Most churches would agree that it's frowned upon quite often, frowned upon by most churches, for a preacher to get up and announce running for president in front of his congregation, or to announce his agreement with a certain candidate, or sponsoring, or promoting a certain candidate in politics. So the church even agrees that there should be separation of church and state. But what they don't realize is if politics has no place in the sanctuary, then religious bias has no place in legislature. In fact, we can't claim to have freedom of religion, yet prohibit the right to marry based on a specific religious point of view. Keep in mind that Christians have not even asked the Muslims, the Buddhists, the Wiccans. They've not asked how these people feel about gays getting married. All of this is just from the Christian point of view. And we have already said that the Christians have already agreed that the politics does not belong in the pulpit, and therefore preaching does not belong in legislature. See, their whole standpoint is that marriage is a religious and moral institution, and it was made by God, and who are we to tamper with it? Marriage is not a religious or moral institution. Marriage is a word in the English language to signify a committed relationship between two individuals. That's what we call it. Okay? They don't call it marriage in foreign countries. They call it whatever the word that they have that means a committed relationship between two individuals. really, we're already married. Okay? Those of us who have longtime partners, those of us in the gay community who have longtime partners, we're already married. Okay? We just don't have paperwork and we don't have legal documentation of such. So that we can have the same protections under the law that married straight couples do. When you have a document from the U.S. government saying that you are betrothed, you are married to this person, that allows for a lot of legal protection. For example, a married couple can file jointly for taxes if you have documentation stating as such. Until gay marriage is allowed in the federal platform, I will never be able to file jointly with my spouse. I will also never be able to be labeled as next of kin if something that was to ever happen to my spouse. Until this whole situation of gay marriage is resolved. According to the argument against gay marriage, marriage is between one man and one woman. So what do we now call David and Bathsheba's relationship? Knowing that he was not married to her, but had committed relationships with more than one person. What do we call them now? In fact, once we accept Christ and we choose to follow Him, we become a part of His bride. Don't argue with me, it just says it in the Bible. The same one that you're using to argue against gay marriage for, or with. It says that we become the bride of Christ once we accept Him and choose to follow Him. Even those of us who are male. How then can the Bible be used to argue marriage being specified to a man and a woman? Especially seeing how as I don't have a sexual relationship with Jesus. We can look at this from two different definitions. Either the definition of the right wing, which says it's between a man and a woman, which doesn't make sense in the marriage of the church to Christ. But then we could look at it from the traditional and the definition that even Noah Webster, who wrote the first dictionary, called it, which is a committed relationship between two individuals. It's not about the sex, people. It's about the committed part. There is nothing that has destroyed this, even if it was. There is nothing that has destroyed more of the sanctity of marriage than divorce. I mean, whether me and my spouse, me and my partner are married and become spouses or not, doesn't have a reflection on your marriage. However, if something starts going awry in your relationship, divorce will do something to it. Okay? So, if we're going to outlaw, if we are going to continue to put a chokehold on gay marriage, then we need to put a chokehold on divorce. Because nothing says separation, nothing says destroy a marriage more profoundly than a divorce. By insisting on forcing religious views on politics and legislature, the church becomes blemished by war blood, greed, and corruption. The church keeps forgetting that Christ is only coming back for a spotless bride. And like I mentioned before, the priest could not enter into the Holy of Holies unless they were clean. Which leads us to the conclusion of this. Simply put, unless the church is ready to get its hands dirty with taxes, blood of war, and destroying the religious freedom that first started this country, it needs to stop intruding in the affairs that govern our country. Don't protest, pray. You'll do a lot more good in your prayer closet than you ever will on a protest line. Which is also probably the biggest reason for churches being cold and churches being spiritless today, is the fact that they've gotten their hands too dirty, that they can't enter into the Holy of Holies anymore. So, church, if you want to start entering into the Holy of Holies again, keep your hands clean. Keep your nose and your hands out of politics. Stop protesting on the lines and start going to your prayer closet instead. Stop protesting funerals. Stop protesting. Protesting gay straight alliances and all this crap. Go to your prayer closet. That's what it's there for. You were only told to pray for your leaders, not protest them. I hope everyone has enjoyed or gotten I know it's not been that much of a excitement, but I hope that some of the things that I've said has really gotten and hit home to some people. And I would just like to say that no matter who you are, no matter what your background, no matter what your religious views or political views, or what your sexual orientation is, I welcome anyone to comment. Okay? Thanks for your time. You have a blessed day.